Okay. I suspect that since the Zoom window, or no, because you tell it your name. Anyhow, Jane Mitchell, you might stick your name in again just to make sure in case the chat from before I hit record doesn't go into the recorded chat. I never know what they're going to share. Anyway, let's get started, shall we? I've been having a frazzled day, so I apologize in advance for being a little bit spacey. In addition to messing up the time on that, I spent the morning getting stung by a bee. So, which normally would just be kind of routine, except it's kind of making me dread the summer because it was my husband's bee. We set up 2 hives. He set up 2 hives last week and not going well. Okay, so to begin, let me close up the polling. You guys want to see who's here? Sure, go ahead, see who's here. Mostly counselors and various other people, and mostly high school, mostly Norfolk. And ooh, someone's here for the first time. Welcome, first timer. I'm not normally frazzled like this. I'm normally frazzled in entirely other unique ways. So, hello, I am Julie Love. I run the McLean School Nurse Liaison Project, which is a program offering education like these presentations, only usually they used to be in real life and live and so much better. Looking forward to doing that again. Also, resources like the ones that I was showing before. And I will now, if you want to get any of the resources that were showing before, here are the links for getting them. Those are also the links for afterwards to do the evaluation. If you need a certificate, you need to do an evaluation. Through the evaluation is where you get to the place where you request the certificate. So make sure you get time to do it all in one go. Don't go back and do it again because that just mucks up with the data. And Zoom tells me that you're here. If you're not sure Zoom is telling me that you're here because you logged in through a browser or you're listening on a phone, then, well, if you're on a phone, you can't really access chat either. But if you're coming in through a browser, you could type your name into the chat. If you're listening on the phone, make sure you note your exact to the minute start and end times of the call. And there'll be a place in the sheet to report that. Those are the only people who need to tell me times. Because then I can match you up with the blank line on the attendance log. That's what Zoom does for phone numbers. They used to at least give like the last 4 digits, but anyway. So, as I said, my program offers these things to Southeastern Massachusetts for a very broad definition of Southeastern Massachusetts. Hi, Dove, how you doing? He's our most distant person here today. Since I do offer certificates, I do need to disclose my conflicts of interest and my commercial bias. I have no conflicts of interest and no commercial bias. My program is funded by some collection of bridge funding. I think my grant actually ended last month, but it's grant funded. We are working on getting state funding, and part of what's frazzled me today was talking to various senators. It looks like there will be an amendment in the Senate budget to continue funding for this. So I would like to take a moment to plug the idea that if you like these and you think it'd be really good for this program to keep existing and to keep offering this to schools on an ever increasing basis throughout Massachusetts, it'd be a real nice time for you to contact your senator and tell them to co-sponsor the budget amendment. They will undoubtedly say what budget amendment, and then you will email me and ask me what budget amendment. So maybe you should just wait until I email everyone and tell them what budget amendment once it actually gets filed and has a number. So on with the show. I'm starting with a bunch of slides that have quotes on them. So sorry if you're on a phone and don't have the visual, but everyone else, I'm not reading these aloud. So for the next minute or so, stuff for you to read. you may have noticed the kind of debate style of that, of back and forth. Substance abuse is a disease that is kind of the, it's weird because there's so much stigma associated with mental health issues. And there's also additionally or separately a lot of stigma associated with substance abuse issues as well. And a lot of it's from misunderstanding. The thing to remember is that nobody says, hey, that's really what I want to do. I want to get addicted to something. I want to have a substance that is calling the shots and making me do stuff whether I want to or not. Quick, someone asked a question in the chat. If you got questions to the substance of it, put question at the beginning, and then I'll address it. And since I've already interrupted, I will answer that one. The recordings are to make sure that I have a copy of the chat. There is, if you go to the material request, you'd be able to get copies of the slides. I did send copies of the slides to everyone who had registered by last night. Actually, I think I sent them this morning. So you may have gotten them in your email, but there is a way to get the slides later. I have links to a previous time when I did the same presentation or a very similar one. I only adjust them a little bit. Depending on how this recording goes, which so far I'm going to say probably not, I might save this recording as well to share, but generally that's how that works. So back to what I was saying, there's just tons of stigma around substance abuse. A lot of people view it as something a person is choosing to do all the time, that it is behavior, and therefore they should just not do that, which not the way it works. So I don't know how many of you have worked with substance abuse before, but you want to recognize that person starts out in pain, and everybody does whatever they can to feel better when they are uncomfortable, whether it's that they feel awkward or they feel pain physically or whatever. We all do something to make ourselves feel better. And if you find something that is highly effective and fast in making bad feelings go away, you're liable to keep doing that one and not develop a broad range of other things to do as well. And so that is, in a tiny kernel, where addiction comes from. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with all these various jargony terms. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them, but I will quickly go through and define each one of these for you. Use and abuse. Use is taking in a substance in order to have it affect your state of mind or your sensational feelings, how you feel and how you emotionally feel. Abuse is all of that, but in a way that we as a society disapprove of. It really comes down to that. I mean, just looking at whether something is legal or illegal quickly moves it from one side to the other. So intoxication is the experience of having an altered sensorium and altered cognition frequently from having a substance. Tolerance is the physiological experience of your brain responds to the substance by changing its structure such that you need more and more and more of the substance to get the same effect. Dependence is use of this substance becomes such an integral part of your life that your life doesn't seem to function without it. This can definitely be a physiological thing, part of tolerance. It can also be a psychological thing. If it's just so much a part of your day, you can be dependent on it. Detox is the physiological, coming off of a substance. It is the medical physiological process of your body adjusting to not having that substance in it anymore. Given that the brain rearranged the furniture to make room for it, it can be painful or even dangerous for the brain to be readjusting to not having the substance in it. Withdrawal is sort of a broader term. Withdrawal is the unpleasant experience of not using the substance. So that can also be physiological or psychological. So if someone says, yeah, I quit smoking 2 months ago and I'm still in withdrawal, yes, that's true. If they say I quit smoking 2 months ago and I'm still detoxing, not so much. Nicotine takes about a week to clear out of your body, smoking can take years to clear out of your life. Recovery or sobriety are the terms we use for when a person who has had a problem with the substance in the past is currently abstaining from using the substance. It may be a temporary situation. It may be a permanent situation. They may aspire to a permanent situation and have it turn out to be temporary, which brings us to relapse, which is resuming use of a substance after a period of sobriety. And you'll notice how much of this cycle is actually not spent actually using the substance and recognizing that addiction is not just when the person is high or drunk. It is all of this other parts of their life. There are so many substances out there to use or abuse. This is not a complete list. This is arguably not even a terribly current list. It keeps changing. There are some that never go away, you know, over in this column are pretty much the ones that are always there. And over here are kind of the coming and going ones. So just about anything could go on that list at some point. I'm not going to go into tremendous detail about individual ones. If you want to ask about individual ones in great detail, more than I went into, stick around afterwards. I will answer questions all you like afterwards. If you've got questions during that you want to save for later, you can always put them in Q&A anytime. I don't open that window until the end, so it's not a distraction. So if you've got a question and you think you might not remember it later, you can go ahead and type it in there. So how addiction happens, okay? You start with doing something and it feels good. If you were feeling particularly bad in the first place, even stronger. You might just be feeling bored, you might be just experimenting, or it might be that, yeah, you're in pain or something really bothers you or something. So when you do something that your brain perceives as helping you, getting you out of a bad spot, it wants you to do more of that. So it releases dopamine. Dopamine is the good job, do that again, reward that your brain offers. Some of the drugs, they cheat. They go straight to the parts of the brain that release dopamine and make it release dopamine as well. So like cocaine and those will themselves get your brain to release dopamine. So you've got all this dopamine going, saying, yes, yes, do more of that, do more of that. It makes a very strong positive reinforcement for doing that. It makes you feel better very quickly, very efficiently. It is the magic off switch for whatever ails you. This is why I always say, don't look for an off switch. Always look for a volume knob. You want to be able to turn down your anxiety, not wipe it out altogether. Because anything that works that well, you're liable to just keep going back to that one and not try anything else. If you keep using the same one over and over and over again, it becomes the person's only means to cope with any distress. And they start applying it to lower and lower levels of what is distressing. Such that they might start when they're in pain and now it's just when they're bored, or now it's just a habit or an automatic habit. It is not that they, like an opiate addict, it's a really insidious thing. Addiction to opiates, you are taking a painkiller, so you do not feel as much physical pain, so you do not continue to practice the coping skills that we refer to as suck up and deal. You know, I'm in pain, but I can live with it. You don't have that practice. And then additionally, the action of the opiates on your nerves lowers your pain threshold so that even lower levels of stimulation cause higher levels of pain. So it's very tough. So the dopamine pathway gets very sensitized to doing this. Oh, if that substance is coming, I'm going to give you dopamine. And the dopamine pathway wants to reinforce and make you do it again. So one way to get you to do something is to encourage you towards it before you're actually even in it. So the dopamine starts to trigger at the hint of the substance, okay, in anticipation of the substance. And it's just to focus mostly just on the substance. So now other things that used to be fun, that used to be good, that used to give you a happy glow of, yes, I want to do more of that, they get flat and boring and gray. They're not as interesting because the brain stopped giving dopamine to them and is focusing on dopamine on the substance. And it's doing it anticipatorily. And what I mean by that is, like, if every night you come home, you pull in the driveway, you go in and you open a beer and start drinking all night, pretty soon the brain starts squirting the dopamine the moment you pull in the driveway. And if you've decided I'm going to stop drinking, and so you pull in the driveway, the dopamine starts to flow, you go in and you don't drink any alcohol, your brain kind of gets pissed because you promised it alcohol. Driveway, then alcohol. That's the way it works. That's the way it's been working. How dare you bait and switch like that? And the brain goes, okay, no more dopamine for you, and slams down the dopamine pathway, stops the dopamine very abruptly. You get a dopamine crash, and that hurts. It really hurts. And that's what craving is. That's why the person will then spend the rest of the evening not being able to actually think about anything else. So that's what happens with addiction. Now, how recovery works is way more complicated, and that one was pretty complicated, okay? It takes a very, very long time. It's ups and downs. It's not something that you can just make a decision and then just, okay, and now I'm all better. One thing is, whatever were the stressors that pushed a person towards the addiction, that the pain that they were healing with their addiction, probably still there. And now you've taken away, or they've taken away from themselves, their only go-to coping strategy for that problem. Plus, depending on what they were addicted to for how long, it may have made their life actively worse meanwhile. So it's like, okay, my life sucked before, and then I used a lot of opiates, and now my life sucks even more. I'm looking at the train wreck I've made of my life by being addicted, and I've got no coping strategies around. Plus, on top of it, anything that remotely reminds me of using is going to trigger that dopamine crash craving. So this is where you turn to someone and say, okay, yeah, you might need to get a new set of friends. You might not be able to go to the same places, be around the same people, even if they weren't people you were using with. That's the thing that really sucks. Yes, definitely. If your plan is, I'm going to go out with my friends when they go to the bar, but I'm only going to order soda, probably not going to work. But it could even be that you were the only one not ordering soda. But if every time you were around them, you were drinking, your brain is going to be doing that to you until, you might be able to overwrite that with enough experiences without the substance, or you might need to completely change your routines and your environments in order to not relapse. People will talk about whether a person is ready to recover. Oh, well, they weren't really ready. And that gives a lot of people a lot of reason to not start on the path. If it's like, well, are you sure you're ready? Oh, well, now that you ask, maybe tomorrow, And so we really want to scale back from that, well, are you sure you're ready? Because if you stop and ask yourself, then you're very on the road towards talking yourself out of trying. And so you really just need to be willing. And part of that is also getting the rest of the world to recognize that it's going to be starts and stops. Relapse may well happen. And it's not that you shouldn't have started that soon because you weren't ready enough. If you say you got to wait until you're so ready that relapse is absolutely guaranteed to not happen, that is a recipe for the person never, ever even starting to try and recover. The health belief model this is one of those theories where people take a kind of obvious thing and put labels on it and then get credit for it, except this one kind of rocks. This is one that people, even though all of this is obvious, people gloss over it and forget it all the time. This is pointing out that if someone is not doing something that we think they should do, someone is not taking this action that we want them to, that they should want to too, that is good, like getting a vaccine springs to mind. Don't know why. It seems to be in the news a lot. So before a person will do that, there's a lot of steps before that. First, they have to recognize that there's a problem. People who say there is no COVID. Then there's the people, then it's, do you recognize that the problem is actually problematic? That's where you get the people saying, oh yeah, there's COVID, but I'm not going to get very sick, so it's not a big deal. It doesn't matter if I don't get the shot. Then you've got the problem actually applies to me. Oh, I could actually get really sick, or I could be someone who would actually spread it. Then you have to accept that there's something that could be done, because lots of people will be like, oh yeah, I know I'm going to die of lung cancer, but there's nothing you can do to get off cigarettes. So is there a solution to the problem? Would the solution actually work? Is it something that I'm actually able to do? Is it more work than it's worth? If all of those line up and I've gotten through all those hoops, then I might be ready to actually make a change. And the problem is, if you've got someone who's not doing what you say, we too often just grab our favorite step and apply it. You know, if you've got someone who's not taking their meds and we're like, well, I've got to tell you how important your meds are. Without those meds, you could die. If the problem is they get that it's bad and applies to them and it would work, but they don't have the money for the meds, they're not capable of that solution, it's just kind of mean to point out to them that without their meds, they could die. So you need to find out where along this pathway they are and help them move along it, not just assume what the problem, what the barrier is, and try to just solve what you think it is. We want to recognize and remind people that we keep thinking once you start, and then the credits roll on your wonderful movie, right? But no, it's forward, backward, and sideways. There's always a far more complicated version. Relapse is definitely part of it. It's very common. You know, I like how you've got this cycle of change and there's just this little thing over here where it might actually stick. Might not, but you keep trying. I really like this one because I just love the phrases on this, where everyone starts off in what they term blissful ignorance. Yes, it's going to be wonderful. And then they find out how hard it actually is, and they refer to that as informed anguish. And then lots of people give up. But then you come to terms with it and you start to be hopeful again, but in a more realistic way. And then you can move into actually making change. One effective approach that you might have heard of is this 12-step program of Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, and so on. The 12 steps are longer than I have time to go into. That's one of the things you can ask about at the end. One of the links at the end is to, I will send you guys new links. I added a link there, but it wasn't in the one that I sent you guys yesterday or today. There's a link that really nicely goes through what the 12 steps are to help understand what they are. So I thought here what I'd add is some details about AA and attitudes people have about it. When someone is first starting to go to meetings, what we recommend is to go to a lot. They say 90 meetings in 90 days. And a really important part is at least 5 different places. Don't just keep going to the same meeting, because there will be something there that is not a good fit for you. And the addiction gremlin on your shoulder is trying to talk you out of recovery. And so if it can find some reason to quit that isn't your fault, it will latch onto it. So you get all kinds of people, oh yeah, I tried going to the meeting, but yeah, it was too smoky, I couldn't do it. Or no one was smoking and I need to be able to smoke. Or it was too religious, or no, there was no religion there and I really thought I needed that spirit. Or they're all sitting in a circle and there's this expectation to talk. Or they're all sitting in rows listening to a speaker and there was no chance to talk. So all different styles of meetings, go to a bunch of different styles until you find ones that click for you. The religious aspect of it is something that is either vital for some people or really off-putting for other people. Not all meetings are overtly religious. Many meetings are extremely religious and very precisely Christian religious. Some meetings they say the Lord's Prayer at. Other meetings they stick to the Serenity Prayer. There is built into it, right there in the first step, is reference to a higher power. So people say, well, then that has to be religious. But what it's actually doing is pointing out that you can't do this alone. It's not pull yourself up by your own bootstraps thing. So higher power is pretty much anything outside of you that is going to help, whether it is your view of God or whether it is your family or the community that you're part of. Some people will say, my higher power is my dog. It's like, okay, that's fine. Whatever works for you. It's it's fun thinking about what's the difference between religious and spiritual, because they pretty much everyone will say that it is a spiritual organization. And basically the reason why it tends to be a spiritual organization is if you tried everything in the world to cure cancer in your child and nothing worked and failure after failure after failure, and then you get a treatment that works, what do you say? Say it's a miracle. And that's spiritual. That sense of wonder and joy that it finally worked. It's a miracle. So part of why 12 steps is spiritual is because it's got a lot of miracles happening in it of people who've not been able to get clean any other way, finding their way there. Which means, since they are the most successful in as much as we can count, given that they are anonymous, so we don't actually know numbers for them. But anyway, they do have very strict definitions on what it counts as being in recovery. One is that it's never a past tense. It's never, I used to be an alcoholic. It's always an ongoing process of continuing to keep your attention on the need to remain sober. And the need to remain sober is absolutely no use whatsoever. You know, if you have one sip, that's relapsing. You don't, zero tolerance for any of the substance. In part because if you said, well, some people could be social drinkers, pretty much everyone would think, oh yeah, that's going to be me. And they go out and relapse. Whoops. There we go. Okay. So now let's drill down on the kids side of this. Okay. The adolescent brain. In adolescence, the brain is developing faster than most other times in life. The other two times are basically prenatal and immediately postnatal. And then it keeps growing, but you know, once the kid kind of grows into that oversized head that they're born with, it's not growing very fast through grade school, junior high. And then in adolescence, it starts to take off again. Now, the kind of growth it's doing in adolescence is still growing new cells and new connections, but it's also doing a lot of pruning away the unused connections, restructuring that way, which is why it's really a disaster to do things that make any parts of your brain go to sleep for a while, any inhibitory things like marijuana, because by the time those cells wake up again, they might have gotten pruned away by being unused cells. The rewards pathways, the dopamine pathway, really, really strong in adolescence. And the critical thinking, you know, the executive function up here in the frontal lobe that lets you think that maybe that's not such a good idea, is not there for them much of the time. So it's very weak. So most of their, not most, but many, many decisions are driven by emotions and by immediacy, immediate gratification without thought towards later consequences. This is, as you can imagine, an absolute train wreck for exposure to mind-altering substances. Part of being a teen is that you've got all kinds of cognitive distortions, you know, things that, filters that get in the way of you seeing things as coherently as you could, like black and white thinking. It's either a wonderful day or a terrible day. You know, overgeneralizing. If I have a bad day, I feel like I always have a bad day. It is permanent. Catastrophizing, where one blip and the world is over. You know, that you immediately assume there's no coming back from any mistakes. There's also developmental vulnerabilities, societal and so on, that are going on as well. Adolescents are, by design, starting to become independent adults. So they are seeking independence from the authority figures around them, parents, adults, school, so on. But we are social animals. And so the idea of I'm going to leave my pack and be independent is terrifying. You don't want to be the, you know, young lion that was kicked out of the pride. You want to have a group. And so they're constantly looking for their new tribe, someplace that they can feel accepted and connected and having a sense of belonging. Paired with this, they are frequently in pain. They're frequently in various levels of distress. Part of this is that wiring, the fact that they've only just started pruning away the unused synapses. So adolescent brains are more densely wired, more synaptic connections than any other time in your life. They really do have more brain connections than any other time in life. This does not mean that they're smart, just that they're very intensely wired. And part of this means that it makes it very hard for them to even filter out sensory things. This is why kids will be playing music while they're doing homework. And lots of people will be, you should have the room be quiet. It's never quiet. And if you take away the music, now you hear everything else and they can't filter it out. You know, a car goes down the road and they're thinking about cars. Someone comes in and they hear them go in the kitchen and they think, wow, I wonder if they're going to have dinner. I wonder what they're making for dinner. Should I make dinner? What do I want? They get very distracted unless they can do something to cut out all that other extra input. And it gets overwhelming having all that extra input and all those extra emotions. So they will have times when they are overwhelmed and they're like, oh, just make it stop. I'm so upset. I'm so frustrated. I'm so lonely. I'm so depressed. I just want it to stop. And the brain's like, okay, we will stop it. And it hits the kill switch and it sometimes overkills it where suddenly they feel totally numb. They don't feel anything at all. They can even feel physically numb where it's like, okay, I was really anxious and now I can't feel my feet. Why is that? Because the brain's just going, okay, shut it down, shut it all down. They're getting overwhelmed. So as a result, they might be trying to shut down their feelings, that they're overwhelmed and they want to kill all this sensory input. Or it might be that they're feeling numb and they want to feel something again. You know, people who cut, sometimes they say it's better to feel pain than to feel nothing at all. Or they might be alternating between trying to kill the sensation or get the sensation going. They also have a really hard time with social dynamics. Okay, they are very likely to perceive any faces not actively smiling at them as being angry. They did a study where they showed various faces: surprise, disgust, astonishment, anger, fear, all those. And teenagers would look at them and go, mad, 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 mad. Anyone who's not actively looking happy at you, they are hardwired to see as being threatening. Because again, if you just got kicked out of your tribe and you haven't found a new one yet, you need to be sort of hypervigilant that way. And just growing up, developmental stages cause discomfort. So if you find something that shuts down the discomfort, it also shuts down the development though. When I'd work in detoxes, I'd noticed that I'd be talking to this dude in his 20s, and if I'd be like, okay, I feel like I'm talking to a 14-year-old. And I'd ask, what age did you first start using? 14. That kind of development frequently kind of stops once they find, oh, whenever I start to feel that uncomfortable feelings of development, I can just go and get drunk. They are actively learning coping skills. And if the first one they find is a big off switch for discomfort, they might not keep looking so much. So the younger someone is when they first start using a substance, the more likely they are to become addicted to it because they won't have continued to learn other things to do with their discomfort. And the more intractable the addiction is, the harder it is for them to get sober. This is pointing out what people use things for, what the kids use them for. Recognizing that there's all kinds, when you look at this, recognize that the reason why they're reaching for these things are because they're overwhelmed by other feelings. I feel sad all the time. I'll use drugs and that'll make me happy. I feel anxious and awkward in front of my friends. If I drink at the party, then I feel comfortable. Things like that. Now, the definition of addiction, because a lot of these substances might be legal and people can use them. So what's that line between use and abuse? And then between abuse and addiction? The core of the definition of addiction is you keep using a substance, and we're doing an activity, but you keep doing this thing, even though you've got some pretty clear evidence that it's not going very well for you, that it is hurting your life. Yeah, you were smoking pot all weekend and you failed that test. Clearly it's having a bad impact on you. Or you were driving drunk and you had a car accident and yet you're still doing it. The reason why is if you keep doing it, it's because the substance itself is getting in the way of you recognizing the consequences. You might not be so good at predicting them, but if you've already experienced the bad consequences and you're not able to say, yeah, that's a reason to not do it in the future, that would be because of addiction. Now, there's sometimes that we don't wait to see if they do it twice. You know, like if someone has a DUI, we don't really care if it was their first time drinking. We say, okay, yeah, you need some treatment as well. The thing is, as we talked about, adolescents, they're not so great with the whole consequences thing in the first place at baseline. They tend to act without thinking about what the negative consequences would be. Therefore, we treat all adolescent substance use as addiction. We don't wait for it to be something that has grown roots into them. Now, I had a slide that had boring charts on it. And I thought, hey, that's the one you guys got. I went to look up the new data, and they actually had a really nicely animated walk through the current data on teen drug use. So I'm going to go ahead and play this video because some of the evaluations say that I should stop talking and play videos sometimes. So here you go. If you can't hear it, say something in chat to let me know. But it doesn't really matter because it's just music. So, no, don't start again. There we go. So anyhow, I thought that was really cool how they laid all the stuff out. They did do the survey again last year. They did cut it off abruptly when COVID happened, but they did get enough responses to have significant results. And if you go to the website that I added into the links that I can send you again, you can see the updated numbers. So I did want to mention teens and marijuana. Like I said, marijuana is a really, really train wreck mixing into what the brain of the teenager is doing. Because as I said, the brain is in the process of pruning away the unused connections. So any cells, any neurons that are really just kind of lying there, not doing anything, the brain's like, okay, we don't need this, and it prunes it away. Okay. Marijuana is an inhibitory neurotransmitter. Pretty much, if you feel it, it occupies a receptor. Otherwise, any chemical just wouldn't do anything in the brain. So it will tell cells to be quiet. And it's not just for the evening, because marijuana also attaches to fat cells throughout your body and becomes its own delayed release, long-acting impact. This is why it's kind of amusing when you work in a methadone clinic, because if someone smokes marijuana once, they have dirty urines for weeks afterwards, because the marijuana takes forever to leave the system. And so you've got a very long-acting inhibitory thing in the brain. You've got some cells that go to sleep for a very long time, and by the time they wake up, they might not be there anymore. It impairs memory, learning, and motivation. It's the instant ambivalence. I don't really, apathy. It's the instant apathy. You just don't feel like doing things. Lots of people I talk to are like, oh yes, I smoke marijuana because it helps with my anxiety. It's the only thing that helps with my anxiety. Don't take away my marijuana. I need it for anxiety. And it might make them relax right then, but it tends to overall increase the baseline level of anxiety, so that they end up needing it more and more and more. It's like a person who drinks to go to sleep, and then you have a very disrupted night's sleep. So it's very frustrating. There's also, I need to find the article originally, but I read an article that was a meta-analysis of many different studies that showed very convincingly that if you have any family history of a psychotic disorder like schizophrenia, you really do not want to try marijuana when you're a teenager, because for some kids, very small number, but it really sucks for them. Even just starting marijuana can flip the twitchy switch in their brain, and they can end up with a lifelong disabling psychotic mental illness. So important reasons to tell kids to please wait. Don't have a problem with it intrinsically, but really not when you are still growing your brain like that. And people will say, yeah, well, that's why we shouldn't have legalized it. Now that it's legal, you can't stop them. I don't see that logic. Because it's not legal for teens. It's just as illegal for teens as it ever was. Alcohol is also not legal for teens. And we don't say, oh, but adults can buy it, so there's nothing you can do. Yeah, we're just going to, decide that kids are going to go ahead and drink. We actually have an opinion about that. Some people might still shrug and go, kids will be kids. But generally, people agree that, yeah, teens should not drink. But they take marijuana as like an inevitability. And it's very weird that people will also turn around and say, yeah, but I smoked marijuana when I was a teenager, and therefore I can't tell my kid not to. Lots of people drank when they were teenagers, and they've got no problem telling their kids not to do that. So I'm not quite sure why there is such a, well, what can you do? It's legal now. And I did as a teen too. So I'm just going to decide that that's what kids do. I have one teenage client who was there with her mom, and they were both adamant that I should not mess with her wanting to keep smoking marijuana every day. It's like, no, don't take that away from both of them. It was very bizarre. People also always want to ask about CBD oil, so I'll just quickly talk about CBD oil. We know so little about CBD. We know very little about any of this because since it's still federally illegal, you cannot actually do studies on it. And those who do manage to get permission to do studies on anything marijuana related are required to only source their marijuana from one federally owned farm somewhere in the South. And reports are that the marijuana coming out of that farm is crappy marijuana that nobody would ever use. And so it really doesn't tell you anything about what's happening out there. So there's very little research about CBD oil in general, anywhere. Also, when it's used as a supplement, anything that's a supplement is not regulated as a drug by the FDA. So you don't necessarily know what's actually in that bottle. You know, it'll say exactly what it says it has, but there's not really anyone checking. There's not a lot of quality control coming out of the FDA for that. So what I say to adult people who will find, like I've got someone who's migraines only responded to CBD oil. And say, if you want to try this for something, okay, CBD oil is theoretically, officially the part that does not get you high. So it would not be mind altering at all. I say, okay, get some, try it. If it works, mazel tov, keep using it, always get it from the same place, because whatever they put in the bottle is what's working for you. If you try and it doesn't work, maybe it doesn't work. Or maybe you should try a different provider, different manufacturer. But when it comes to kids, all that stuff about the inhibitory, and I haven't seen anything to know how much CBD oil is also an inhibitory long-acting thing that you would not want in there. So when it comes to kids, I'd pretty much say no, except for epilepsy, because seizure disorders, you want the kid to live to be an adult. So, and a lot of kids do not respond to typical anticonvulsants, you know, medical pills. And so parents who are looking for CBD oil for the seizure disorder is not their first reach. They've been trying everything else. And if nothing else is working, then sure, it's a bit of a Hail Mary and it's worth the risk. Now we talk about SBIRT. That's why I wound up writing this one, was because SBIRT came along. How many of you do the hand raising thing if you are involved with the implementation of SBIRT in your schools? Must have more than one. Okay. Okay, raise your hand if you have no idea what SBIRT in schools is. Oh, wow. A lot more of you have never heard of this. You are so lucky. Okay, SBIRT. SBIRT is, you know, a funky little acronym, but it was a mandate that came 3 years ago, I think, that is now in state law, that every school district must do this mandatory universal screening of all the kids twice. They get to pick the years, but they have to do screening for substance abuse of everybody. Most schools are doing it, I think, in like 7th grade and 10th grade. You know, so you pick 2 years and you got to do everybody. And the regulation that specifies that you have to do it following this pattern, SBIRT, that I will unpack for you. And so schools end up developing a team of who all's doing it. And initially, to help make it palatable, the state was like, and we will give you all the money you need so that you can hire a sub for the people in your team to go out and get trained. And they go out and they do the training. And then they come back and they do the SBIRT, but I'm not quite sure how you manage to then own those staff and never let them leave, because at some point they leave and you need to get someone else trained. And the money did not continue. So they aren't continuing to cover ongoing training. So it's a little bit annoying that way. So SBIRT stands for screening, brief intervention, and refer to treatment. So you're screening everybody. If somebody's got substance abuse issues, you do a brief intervention and then you refer them to treatment. So, and they specify how you do the screening and how you do the brief intervention. Now, screening is different from assessment. Screening is just kind of a yes, no. Ask some questions and see if they flip the switch that says, yes, you're worth looking at more. I include 2 screening tools for substance abuse here. This is the one that is required as part of SBIRT. I forgot to get my little pointer. I don't know what you see when I use the arrow, so I will get my pointer. So over here, this is CRAFT. CRAFT is the prescribed one to use. And CRAFT starts with a screening to access the screening. You start with asking them, have they used any alcohol, marijuana, or anything else in the last year? If they say no, you still ask them about the cars, but then you stop and you're all done. If they say yes, then you ask all of these. The car question is, have you ever driven a car or ridden in a car with someone who was driving while they were intoxicated and impaired? Have you ever used a substance in order to relax? Have you used a substance when you are alone? Have you forgotten what happened while you were using a substance? Have your family or friends expressed concern about your use of the substance? And has it messed up your life in any way? It's an okay screening tool. I kind of don't like acronyms where they mess with the spelling, though. It's annoying to me. CAGE is like the only acronym on the planet that I like. And I do want to walk you through CAGE just because it's very useful too. This was developed for alcohol specifically, but it applies to pretty much all addiction. C is for cut down. Have you tried to cut down on your use of this? Which indicates that you yourself thinks there's a problem here. A could be either of these. It is, do you get angry or annoyed when someone is challenging you about it or asking you about, hey, are you using that? Or alternatively, or additionally, do you get anxious if you face the prospect of not being able to get your substance? So heads up when you're driving to school and you want to stop at Dunkin's, but the line's too long and you can't stop at Dunkin's and you're really feeling twitchy about the fact that you wanted to stop at Dunkin's, totally counts. G is for guilty. Do you feel guilty about the effects that this substance use is having on your life? It might be, yeah, I was playing video games so much that I failed that test because I never studied. It might be the cars I keep getting damaged because I'm driving drunk. It might be I lost my kids to DCF because I was hot, you know, anything like that. Do you feel guilty about the effects? Because that's showing that you've got the bad effect and you're still using. And then E sounds very alcohol. Well, actually, it sounds kind of, eye-opener is having a drink first thing in the morning. And it seems very very alcohol specific, but it applies to a lot of other substances as well. This is evidence that you've had so much of the substance so consistently that that time spent asleep is enough for you to start going into detox, into withdrawal. And so you have some of the substance as soon as possible in the morning in order to fight off those withdrawal symptoms. So the screening you do to the kids. Then comes brief intervention, and they want us to use motivational interviewing. Now, motivational interviewing is amazing. Motivational interviewing is wonderful, wonderful stuff. It is an excellent, excellent approach to anything you do with teens, with people in general, but especially teens. And it is an excellent approach for substance abuse conversations because you are talking about the possibility of changing your behavior. And you're talking about how do you decide things. So that's why it's great for substance abuse and great for teens. For universal screening, not so much, because it is a process. It is not a quick thing. And when we would say, you know, how long is this going to take? And the powers that be would say, oh, well, when you're new, it might take like 15 minutes, but as you get familiar with it and you get good at it, you can crank right through maybe 5 minutes per kid. Motivational interviewing, as you get good at it, it takes longer because it shows that you are more able to sit with the person in their uncertainty and let them reach decisions rather than quickly jumping to the answer for them. Okay, the process of motivational interviewing, and it is a process, not just a tick box, is helping a person explore their ambivalence. Work on making a decision. Now, ambivalence, we tend to think means, oh, I don't care. No, ambivalence does not mean you don't care. Ambivalence means I care very much. I really, really want this. And I also really, really want the opposite of this. What do I do about that? I really, really want things that don't fit together, mutually exclusive things. And it is a struggle. It is uncomfortable. It's a pain. That's why people kind of ignore one side and just double down on the other side. This is helping them in a very supportive way, stop running away from whichever side they've been ignoring and really look at both sides of it. you have to recognize ambivalence is easily mistaken for resistance. And it's mostly our fault, because if there's someone there who's not sure of something and you're like, oh, well, I'll give you the answer, you should do this, and they really feel ambivalent, the moment I've staked out one side of the choice, they naturally grab onto the other side and argue the other side, because that's what ambivalence is about, is fighting these two sides against each other. There's a rope there, I grab one end and pull, they're going to grab the other end and pull. Not because they want to fight with me, but just because that's what the rope is for. And that's what ambivalence is for. So the key to have them not get all resistant on you is it's kind of clear which answer you want them to come to, but don't be arguing it for them, because then they're just going to argue back. The other thing we do in motivational interviewing is, having explored the ambivalence, helping them figure out, okay, now what do I do next? To potentially continue this exploration and continue the gradual process of making a change in my life. This is great for anything a person is struggling with, whether it's substance abuse or quitting some other behavior, or diabetic care, or asthma treatment, or should I go on vacation, or anything that you're I really want both and I don't know how to decide. This is a great process. If you learn a lot about it, everyone in your family starts asking you for help with their decisions. Or they start really resenting you because you don't just give them an answer, you help them figure out the answer. If you're the sort of person who really wants to just tell people the answer, you're probably going to find motivational interviewing really frustrating, because you have to also be okay with them potentially deciding not what you would choose if you were in their shoes. No system is complete without an acronym. So in motivational interviewing, they talk about the OARS skills. Open questions. Okay, don't ask lots of things that they can just get away with a yes, no, or a shrug. You want something that, tell me more about. It's a great way to start just about any sentence. You're trying to encourage more conversation. You need to be sincere about encouraging that. Again, not so easy when you've got a line of kids to get through, but we're just talking about motivational interviewing. We're not going to think about how it fits into SBIRT just now. Then A is affirmations. Giving positive regard to whatever they say, making them feel like talking was actually going well for them, because you are acknowledging that what they had to say was actually worth hearing. Okay. And part of how you show it was worth hearing is through reflection. You are rephrasing things back. So as I understand it, you're thinking this and this, but you're bothered by that. Did I get that right? So that you are showing that you listened, and that either you understood what they said, or that you are open to being corrected if you didn't, that you are checking. You're not saying, okay, yeah, well, I know what you should have said, so I'm just going to go with that. But having it be, yeah, did I get this right of what you're actually saying? And part of reflection kind of can flow into summarizing, kind of pulling together. Okay, so you said this and this and this, and also that and that. That's when you can start to kind of put a little weight on one side of the scale instead of the other, where you're pulling together, well, you say these are the good parts and these are the bad parts, and you can kind of fluff up the good parts and the bad parts, or vice versa. So you can slant that a little bit, but you got to be subtle about it. Otherwise, it's kind of obvious. There are 4 steps in the process of motivational interviewing. First one is, you got to connect with the person so that they actually feel like talking, because the point of it is getting them to actually be sharing stuff, not just verbally ticking off boxes that you hold up for them. So you need to connect with them enough that they feel like you want to actually listen to them. Then you bring it around to what you're actually supposed to talk about. And now you're trying to draw out their feelings about it and their opinions, all of them, the good ones and the bad ones. And then the final plan is pulling it all together and deciding what you're going to do next. What are the next steps for this person? Watch out for the things that we always slide into, because this is what the grown-ups are used to doing. One thing, especially if you feel like you got a time crunch, is you want to jump straight to planning. And I do that all the time. The moment someone's like, I've got a problem with this, I'm like, hey, you know what you could do about that? So don't rush into planning, and keep asking open questions. Don't make it like an interview where you're just grilling them with lots of questions. And then the third one's the hardest for me. Don't tell them what to do. Really try not to give advice. Anything that comes out of their own head is going to be way stronger and way stickier and way more likely for them to actually engage and do it than anything you say, even if it's the same exact thing that you say. So you want to not be the one who said it, because they might decide that they're not allowed to say any of the things you already said. And then they're just going to go with things that don't work as well. And I've been talking to a lot of parents with teenagers and saying, okay, you might know what your teen should do. Do not tell them what you think they should do, because part of being a teenager is that you've got sort of this unwritten rule that you're not allowed to take any of the advice that your parents give you. And so if the parents have already laid out all the good options, you're not leaving them a lot of options for them to choose from other than the bad ones. So let them come up with the solutions as much as possible. You want to not be lording it over them. Well, I'm the expert, I know everything. There is the fact that you probably know a lot more about things than they do. They don't know what they don't know, but they do know what they will listen to. So ask them first, so when you see that there's something that you'd like to say, correct them about a factual thing, or offer them, if they're like, well, no one really knows whether this actually hurts you or not. Say, would it be okay if I tell you some of the things that I've read about that answer that question? So that they actually have, it's very unlikely for them to say no. And if they do say no, they just saved you a lot of time, because if they're saying, no, you can't tell me this, they weren't going to listen to you anyway. If they've said yes, now they feel a little bit more obliged to actually take in what you're saying because they've agreed to it. So ask before you inform them against their will. And be real careful not to pigeonhole anyone or any of their behavior, any of their thoughts, even just internally to yourself, because it will make it harder for the whole process to go forward. And that one's really hard to do. And it's really easy to be like, oh yeah, another one of these. Nope, no one is a one of these. So for the evoking, because that's the main part, you're trying to draw out opinions about the possibility of change. You're trying to draw out things like that. So you notice anything they say that hints at maybe what they're doing isn't so great. So if they're like, yeah, I was out with my friends drinking, my parents were so pissed when I got home, they won't let me drive at all. So it sounds like your parents really have strong opinions and problems happen when you're drinking, huh? Things that, because that will be a reason to maybe consider changing their behavior, so on. Ask them how does the substance fit into their life? What does it do for you? What do you like about it? And what's not so great about it? The fact that you're actually willing to sit there and listen to them wax rhapsodic about how much they like it makes them willing to sit there and think about the things that they don't like about it. Okay, again, not grabbing two sides of the rope, not saying, but there's all these bad things, but let them, if you say, yeah, tell me more about the good things. Really? And what are the downsides? The fact that you listen to the good side makes them more willing to listen to the downside. And anything that is baby steps, you want to validate and congratulate. If you've got a kid who's like, yeah, I got blackout drunk once and it was I don't even know how I got home that day. So now when I'm out with my friends, I only drink like 4 beers. We really don't want them to be drinking 4 beers, but if it's less than before, say, wow, that was a really good choice for you to cut back, because it sounds like that'd be really scary. Validate whatever change they do. And you want to help them reflect on decisions they've made or are in the process of making. Now, when it gets to the planning stage, recognize that substance abuse is not an on-off switch. So planning is not going to be, okay, so how are we going to get you to never do that ever again? That's not a feasible goal. It's got to be small steps, validating whatever partial change they have, and thus also saying, and come back and tell me how that went. And then maybe you'll talk about the next step and the next step and the next step. You're not if you say, okay, so now how are we going to get you to have nothing? They're not coming back, and they're not going to even cut down. So recognize that it's building a gradual bridge. It's not jumping straight into the perfect world of abstinence. Okay. The problem is acknowledging that they're going to keep using something can feel uncomfortably like we're okay with that. So you do make sure that you are remaining the ethical adult who is pointing out that they really should not be doing this. And so you acknowledge that by saying, well, if you really don't think you're ready to stop altogether, do you think you might be able to cut back? Do you think you might be able to only do this on weekends? Do you think you might be able to make sure you've got a safe ride home? Things like that. So you're not endorsing unhealthy activity, but you're acknowledging that any progress is still worth doing. As I said, it's like an SBIRT, you're supposed to do all the kids in that grade, mixed in with all your other copious free time. Okay. Well, first of all, it's always good to learn motivational interviewing because, like I said, it is dead useful in everything. It's very, very cool to get in the practice of just actually being more of a midwife to the process of evolving a decision rather than going in and fixing everything for people. But when you're doing it for SBIRT, keep it simple. Pare it down, learn the whole thing just in case you feel inspired or have extra time one day. But you want to keep it simple. What role does this substance play in your life? What do you like about it? What's not so hot? A really cool way to do this is on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is you totally don't want to quit, and 10 is you're quitting today. Where are you on that? And they'll be like, I'm a 4. Instead of saying, oh, damn, a 4, couldn't you be a 6? How do we get you up to a higher? Don't do that. Instead say, oh, a 4. Why are you a 4 and not a 2? Thus, the answer to that question is they now need to articulate to you the reasons for quitting, the reasons leading them more towards quitting and not towards sticking with it. So it's a wonderfully sneaky way to do that, of just whenever possible, you're getting them to reflect on and articulate the reasons to make the change. And then you jump to, okay, so could we make a plan now for you to do this much towards getting better and come back and talk to me again Tuesday? Very specific, short, immediate time frame. It's really good to have an achievable step that they can then feel empowered by. If it's like, yeah, and I'm going to think of you as scum until you're completely successful, they're not going to come back. Okay. What you want is to have them coming back frequently and you praising every little step they did so that they can build a sense of, hey, maybe I could actually do this. And you want them to come back and have the connection with you. Now, the refer to treatment part in here, they kind of get a bit Pollyanna-ish about. Okay, first of all, when I tell people that part of my job is offering resources, that's a wonderful Rorschach blot kind of word. People see in that word what they want to see. Most of what they want to see is that somewhere I've got this magic referral list full of therapists and treatment centers that take all insurances and have openings right now, no wait list, and they'll call you back within 15 minutes. Yeah, no, I do not have such a magical referral list. I have for years been saying to everybody, hey, send me what you have, because I cover a huge area and I do not actually have a personal connection with every single therapist in the state of Massachusetts. But if you know someone who's really good around you, tell me and I'll start making a list of who gets recommendations. Not a single person has ever sent me a single name from that request, in part because once you've got someone who's good, you really don't want to share them and have them fill up and not be available next time you need to refer someone. So yeah, I do not have the data for that. And when it gets to specific to substance abuse, There's not a lot of treatment out there for that either, for any age, but especially for teens. There is a directory there, and there's various other resources that I can send you. I've been trying to compile whatever list I can so I can send you a list of what I've got so far. But true, if someone needs referral to treatment, it's kind of difficult at that point. One thing is referral to treatment is also perceived as possibly saying, well, maybe you should be seeing the guidance counselor and referring to the guidance counselor. On the next slide, we'll talk about how that gets sticky. Okay, but if they need to be referred for, treatment, you can start with the PCP. Just about everyone's got at least a pediatrician. So if you've got nowhere else to look, start with the PCP. If the PCP is like, why are you playing hot potato? Why are you giving me this? I've got nothing else either. What they have that you don't have is they've got MCPAP. That's the Massachusetts Child Psychiatry Access Project. And that is the magical resource number that pediatricians can call for a consult with a child psychiatrist. And they expanded to have a specific to substance abuse corner of that. So the way it works now, it used to be that you call and get your own local regional hub, but now whenever they call MCPAP, they get kind of a central number. And if they say it's about substance abuse, then it gets funneled straight to the ASAP program, I think, at Boston Children's. Anyway, so the PCP does have access to resources that the schools don't. So going to the PCP is a good start. I also have something that I've written up about how to find a therapist. So following those same steps can also help. Addiction starts with unmet psychological needs underneath. So a therapist might be a good idea in general, even if they aren't specifically substance abuse aimed. If you've got someone who's self-medicating because they're very anxious, yes, a therapist would be part of the referral to treatment. Now, there are some problems with implementing this in the schools. You may have heard. One is, who does all this screening? I have heard about it and coming out mostly with the school nurses side. And there was kind of this push of, yeah, have the school nurses do it. It's not like they're doing anything else all day, right? Yeah, no, that's not the way the school nurses day goes. So saying, here, let's give you one more thing. Not very helpful. Most of the schools have a team that does include the school nurse and may also include social workers, guidance counselors. It might include health teachers. It can include anyone that they get trained for it. It's a little bit of a problem, though, as far as at one point I suggested that they tap into the huge number of nursing students that desperately need clinical experience. Nurse practitioner students could come and be doing this, and that would be great. And their answer was no, because the kids need to have this connection of the person they're going to come back to. Except whoever you happen to be getting screened by may or may not be someone that you're comfortable coming back to. It might be that, yeah, I can talk comfortably with the nurse, but it's the health teacher asking me these questions. I'm not going back to the health teacher. And so if only they had someone else, an outside person, first of all, they might be more honest with the stranger. And the outside person could then say, okay, so who would you like to be talking to? And then the kid would be able to choose which staff person is approachable to them. But as it is, you've got the team from the school doing this. Next problem you've got is privacy. How do you do this without it becoming the hot rumor of who's using what or who had a positive screen and so on? First of all, obviously, you need to have a location that people can't be listening in on everything, which for some schools is nigh on impossible space-wise. So you need to find a place where they can avoid being overheard. Then you need to recognize that if it's like, oh, well, another rationale for why it isn't an onerous mandate is that, well, most of them are going to be negative, and that doesn't take long at all. It's like, okay, so if every kid comes out in 2 minutes, the one kid who comes out 15 minutes later, yeah, everybody kind of knows that there was some reason for that. So you want to also be alert to that and either have how long it takes be something that isn't noticeable, that you don't have the line out there waiting, or you just randomly talk extra to some people so that you've mucked up, pick some kids that everyone knows that they are straight as an arrow and not possibly using anything, and just chat with them about movies or something. So you wouldn't be letting that out. But the biggest problem is the issue of confidentiality, because they did want to address and be worried about confidentiality. So they wrote all these details into the actual law is a problem. You don't have the flexibility to figure out what actually makes sense and works. And one thing that they were tied into knots about was not wanting to have a mandate they wanted to be collecting statewide data, but they also didn't want parents coming at them with pitchforks about the fact that the state is collecting their kids' names. So they have this whole convoluted reporting system of what you're using to report it back on that has no names in it, and so on and so forth. And to make really, really sure and really reassuring that confidentiality is so important, they wrote into it that whoever is doing the screening cannot tell another living soul what this kid said without a written release from the child. You can't even turn to the other screeners. You can't, which is ridiculous. When I was at one of the trainings and I brought this up, and they're like, well, things like birth control, that's private. I'm like, yeah, and if I'm a nurse in a clinic and someone's asking me about birth control, I can go and talk to the doctor. I'm allowed to talk to other people within the unit that is doing this process. It really ought to be that you could at least talk to the other people on the team. But the way it's written, you can't. And part of why this is really scary is you ask every kid about the damn car. Because the thing is, if you get a kid who says, oh yeah, once my friend, I maybe he had something to drink. I don't know. He was driving a little fast, but yeah, maybe. You do have permission to break confidentiality, of course, when a kid's in danger. Is that kid someone that you're going to call the parents now and say this to them? Probably not, because if you report that, every kid's going to know that pretty much you say anything, they're going to tell your parents. That the slightest little anything is going to result in them calling your parents. So most likely, you would not have that be a reportable thing. And at some point, there will be kids who are in a car accident with a drunk driver. And at some point, the grieving parents are going to go, well, wait, didn't our kids have that SBIRT screening? Doesn't that mean that someone asked them if they've ever ridden in a car with someone who's drunk? Maybe they did this before, and if we'd known, life would be different now. I want to know who did the screening and didn't tell me. And if it was the school did the screening, the team did the screening, there's a reason why we have committees. I'm really worried about people having, their license, their career, everything on the line, because they aren't allowed to collaborate around a decision like that. So it's really kind of a problem. And back to if referred to treatment is, would you like to talk to the guidance counselor? You got to get the kid to sign a paper before you can even tell the guidance counselor that they need to go talk to them. I mean, you could tell the kid to go and introduce himself, I guess, but so the confidentiality piece, the way it's written so strictly, is kind of a problem. I mean, I'm all over confidentiality being great, but the way it's applied to this is a bit problematic. That said, the attitude of the powers that be was, this won't be a problem because pretty much everyone's going to say no. Hardly, and the ones who are positive, we already knew that they were positive. Which begs the question, why are we doing this? It's like, how worthless do you think school nurses' time is if it's like, yeah, go ahead, do this, totally jumping through the hoops for no reason. But anyway, So they said it would really not take long at all. You wouldn't need to talk to the kids for more than a few minutes at a time and still be able to call it motivational interviewing, and it would just go smooth. And a lot of the districts, even the really big ones, have said, yeah, we do it. It's no big deal. We get it done. Maybe it's that they're very efficient. Maybe it's not that bad. Maybe they've figured out, yeah, there are the corners that you need to cut. It's not really motivational interviewing, but it sort of looks enough like it to pass. So I always have links. And like I said, there's, I thought I added in on this. Anyway, various good articles in here. There is a service directory that's online. I think I downloaded it. So if you can't get it online, I could send you the archaeological remnant of what it looked like a couple of years ago. That's the problem with these directories. Unless someone is keeping them updated very quickly, they are not relevant anymore. And this is a really good way if you want to understand more about motivational interviewing. There's some very good videos that I highly recommend out there. Terry Gross, who does Fresh Air, an interview, did a really cool interview with this woman who wrote a book called The Unbroken Brain. And it was about our approach to substance abuse treatment. And as she pointed out, there is no other disease on the planet where we incorporate into the treatment the idea that you have to apologize for being sick. You owe us an apology for what you did. You know, and it's weird to have that sort of enforced. If you do not feel ashamed first, we're not going to actually treat you, is a tone that is very prevalent in substance abuse circles. There's also some good TED Talks. This is the thing that I added was nice animation of reading the 12 steps. If you always wondered what exactly is in the 12 steps and you found it kind of tedious to just look at them on a screen, they do a nice job. And if you want a video about motivational interviewing, you know, it's a good 15-minute introduction to it. Now, as always, I say we can now talk about anything. There's all kinds of things in the substance abuse world that I did not get to, that I did not, know if I would have time for. So when I finished going through the slides and didn't want to add the stuff in there because I didn't know if that would make me run overtime, I thought I'd stick it back here and let people vote or choose. So if you want me to talk about one of those and you're very, very shy, you could just put the number for it over in chat. That's why I numbered them. I'm going to look at the question down here. Oh yeah, that's just about the slides. So if you've got something else you want to ask me about, by all means, you can raise your hand and I can make you audible, or you can type it into the Q&A. Or if you've got comments, you can type those into chat. But we do have another half hour. So if you wanted to ask about any of these things, I'd be delighted to discuss them. Or if you've got other things, specific situations or kids or anything else. This is the last one of the series that Norfolk DA's office put together. And I'm really glad that they invited me to do these. Ooh, someone's voting for the meds. Yes, medications that help with recovery. There are various meds out there. Ooh, and someone else wants 2, 7, 8, and 9. Okay, let's start with the meds because the meds are an obvious relevant one. Okay, there are various meds that help depending on what you're addicted to. They are addressing that dopamine reinforcing pathway. So naltrexone is a medicine that can be taken every day, and it blocks some of the dopamine receptors so that your brain doesn't get so reactive to them. And thus, if you use, it doesn't work. You don't get high. And so the naltrexone is one that you take every day in order to break that cycle of when I feel bad, I do this and I feel better. and change it into, when I feel bad, I do this and it doesn't help. A little bit sad, but it's also, naltrexone can be used for self-injurious behavior because the same sort of thing happens with endogenous opiates as well. So that's the most common one. There's also one called Compral that is taken 3 times a day. And it's 2 tablets that are each 333 milligrams because someone was having fun with their numbers when they came up with having a dose of 666 for the substance abusers. Anyway, usually when you've got a med that's 3 times a day, there is a push to make it more convenient, make it be a long acting, do something, like the naltrexone. There's a version of it mixed with opiate that you can get as a once a month shot. So you don't have to remember to take it every day. The point of Compral is to stay 3 times a day, because that means 3 times a day, you remind yourself, yes, I need to remember to stay sober. I need to keep thinking about this and keep it on the front burner of my priorities is to refrain from using my substance today, one day at a time. So another one you may have heard of is antabuse, disulfiram. That's a real old school medicine. It basically exists because it is cheaper than hiring someone to follow you around with a cattle prod and zap you whenever you drink booze. Because that's basically what it does. It stops the metabolism of alcohol at the halfway point. What you might not realize is that when you're metabolizing alcohol, first you turn it into poison, and then you turn it into sugar. And so if you stop at that halfway point, you get sick as a dog. And so that's what disulfiram is for. You take it every day, and then if you try to relapse, you really learn your lesson and you don't do that again. The problem is it also will make you sick as a dog if you use the wrong mouthwash or cough syrup, or someone thinks that if I serve you chicken and wine sauce, it's no big deal. So there is a problem with that. Some other meds that are interesting are, then there's the opiate replacement meds, such as Suboxone or methadone. Methadone you may have heard about. I've got up there why methadone clinics are great. Methadone is an opiate, or as we call it, an opiate agonist, meaning it's an opiate. It occupies the receptor cells, but it is a precise measured amount instead of whatever you get from the drug dealer in the corner. And it's got a very, very long action, long half-life, so that you don't have the roller coaster of high and then down and high and then down. So pretty much it keeps you from going into withdrawal without you getting high. And to keep people from abusing it, they regulate it very strictly, so strictly, in fact, that you have to come in and get it every day. And this is where people will say how terrible a methadone clinic is. And definitely there are some people around the methadone clinic that you would not want babysitting your children, but they're also really great in many ways. For one thing, you got to show up every day to get your dose. And because we've got the dose and we get to say whether we handed it to you or not, they can put all kinds of requirements. And so I worked in a methadone clinic for a couple months, and it was when they come in, first of all, they have to be polite. I've never had people be so polite to me. I heard them out online. They're swearing about us out online, but face to face, I'll take it, even if it's all fake. But then if it pops up, today's your random urine screen, you got to go and give a urine. If you refuse, well, then you're going to have the negative repercussions. If you don't go to the group therapy that is part of the program, if you do not go to the individual therapy that's part of the program, you get, negative marks, basically. If you're doing all that stuff, which will help you get better, then you gradually earn being able to take some home, come every other day, we got some people who come once a month, and it's very cool. They've got to bring a lockbox. Sometimes it's a very cool lunchbox with a lock on it. So it's really neat because it handholds a person through doing everything they need to be able to get better. And you get to watch people get their lives back. Because like I said, you detox, and now you're looking at the shattered remains of your life. You've got no job. Your kids are in DCF custody. Everyone's abandoned you. Now you got the methadone clinic. You've got someone right there cheering you on. And we see people who are coming at the early shift because they're going to work. They've got jobs and they need to be able to get their dose and be able to get to work on time. So they've got a special slot of time for those people. You'll have the people who are coming with their kids because they got their kids back. So you get to see people getting their lives back. Once you've got your life back, maybe then you'll be able to get off the methadone altogether. But trying to get off the opiate when your life is in a shattered ruin is really, really, really hard. So, but people thought, damn, that's inconvenient. Why don't we make it something they can take home? So they invented Suboxone, which was fascinating because they made it a sublingual tablet. And the problem is, well, what if they just inject it? What if they snort it? What if they abuse it in some way like that? And it's got packaged in it. It's a mixture of naltrexone and the opiate. So it keeps you at just the right balance, not too much, not too little. But it's got in there extra naltrexone, extra Narcan that's only released if you abuse it. So if you inject it, you just took a big hit of Narcan and you go into a really nasty withdrawal and you get sick. So it was non-abusable. But there's all kinds of other problems with how Suboxone is regulated that I won't bother going into. The last one in the interesting meds is Topamax, which I'm delighted because Topamax is so bad at so many things. And this is the one thing it does well. They did a study where they gave it to 52 people who are drinking a ton of booze a day, like a fifth of vodka or more a day. And they gave them Topamax, which is a mood stabilizer, also for migraines, also for seizures, but doesn't really do those very well. And they gave that to them every day. And 50 of them were down to just drinking 1 or 2 beers. It's like, wow, that is 96%. That's amazing. None of them stopped completely, though. So by the definition of recovery is only if you're completely sober, abstinent, that would be 0%. So it's like, okay, did it work? Did it not work? How do you define that? Which then led me to the wondering, if you've got someone who's on the methadone clinic, do they count as sober? If someone is taking Suboxone, do they count as sober? And that's where you start saying, okay, is the disease taking in the substance, or is the disease the dysfunction throughout your life? If by having a prescribed access to the substance, you can have a functional life, that should count as recovery. Especially because when you flood your brain with opiates, it stops making its own because it doesn't need to. And sometimes it doesn't remember how to. So there are some people who can never stop taking an outside opiate. They will be sick. They won't, it's like having the flu when you were in withdrawal. And normally you go through that and your brain wakes up and starts making your own opiates again and gets used to the lower level and life goes on. For some people, never happens. I mean, there'd be people coming in to the methadone clinic getting 1 milligram a day. I mean, other people are getting like 60 or 100. And it's 10 milligrams per milliliter. So it's just not even a full drop going in a little cup. But they got to come every day or they get sick. So that's not that different from someone whose pancreas no longer makes insulin. Maybe they were born that way. Maybe it's in their genes. Maybe they made really bad dietary choices in their life. We do not care. We just go ahead and give them the treatment they need to be healthy. But somehow, if it's that their brain doesn't make opiates, we treat them very differently. We're like, well, is it your own fault? I mean, maybe it's in their genes. Maybe they made bad choices. Maybe they had a back injury. And once they started taking prescribed meds for the back injury, something happened in their brain. We don't know, but we will treat them very, very differently, which is very unfair. So those are the meds for, let's see, quick, someone had typed in, is there any data, recent data about how COVID quarantine increased or decreased adolescent substance use? I haven't seen the data. There's real good arguments for both. If they were just being quarantined with their family, it would go down because they don't have the opportunity as much. But isolation is really, really difficult for people who are struggling. I mean, adults with substance abuse definitely went up. Definitely huge amount of increase of substance abuse. With adolescents, it's a matter of supervision And if they are under more supervision because of quarantine, it probably would be going down. Except I've been hearing about kids who just kept going out with their friends the whole time. And so it may well have gone up. I haven't seen the data either way. I could see arguments either way. So let's see, the Russian treatment's really fast. Remember I talked about the anti-abuse? In Russia, where you're allowed to lie to your clients, what they did was they put one of those things like a Norplant, you know, a little matchstick plastic under the skin, and they say, okay, what you need to do is never drink again, because we just put this in, and if you drink, you will die. So don't drink. What that little straw contains is about 1 week of slow release anti-abuse, just 1 week's worth. Because if you're going to relapse, it's going to happen in the first week. And if they relapse while they've got anti-abuse in their system, they get sick as a dog. And then they don't die, but they are very likely to think that that was lucky, that they nearly died. They totally could have died. And next time for sure they will die. And as long as they can feel that lump there, they're like, oh yeah, can't drink, I might die. Even though after the first week, the lump does nothing. And they've had a lot of success with people stopping drinking based on that flat out lie about how that works. So I found that just very amusing. Someone said treatment recommendations for fentanyl addiction, same as any opiates. If someone is addicted, things to know, the 3 big things that people get addicted to: opiates, alcohol, and cocaine. I mean, yeah, there's caffeine, nicotine, and all kinds of other things, but let's talk about these 3. If you know someone who is addicted to benzos, did I say opiates, alcohol? Anyhow, benzos, opiates, and alcohol is what I meant to say. If you've got someone who's addicted to benzos or alcohol, you want them to detox in a medical facility under medical supervision, because you can die. You can have seizures and you can die. And so you really want them to be in a quality detox. Quality meaning that if the alcoholic is not coming out for their assessments every few hours, someone's willing to go in there and at least take their blood, you know, take their pulse while they're asleep to make sure that they're not about to die. Opiate addicts, the only time you might have such a bad withdrawal that you die would be if you put Narcan in that actively kicks the opiates off. It's a selective antagonist, meaning it will rip the opiate off the receptor and cap off the receptor. And when you go that quickly into no opiate receptors occupied, you can get sick enough to potentially die, which is why you use Narcan only if they're overdosing, and it's, you know, still an improvement. But if they're just metabolizing it out, it is miserable. It's the worst case of flu you ever had, and goes on, depending on what you were using, for days or a week or more. But you won't die. You'll just kind of wish you could. And you will almost certainly relapse because it's so miserable. So the reason to go into a controlled detox for an opiate is more a matter of in order to succeed rather than for safety's sake. So a fentanyl addiction would be the same thing, where you'd like to go into a detox. You'd like to go into a place where you can detox safely. There's a couple of different approaches to detox. One is where they will do the buprenorphine shots. This is an injection that contains opiate, sort of a mixture of an opiate and the Narcan. So some of the receptors get capped off and some of them get occupied in a very precise way. And then you can gradually decrease the dosing on that so that the brain will start getting rid of the unused receptors and go back to a normal level of receptors and so on. So you come in, and one thing we have to watch out for is that the person is not currently really high, because if you put the bup in, then they get that really dangerous withdrawal. So you got to wait until they're already moderately miserable, and then you start doing the bup and step, tapering down. And they can switch over to the Suboxone then, because it's the same medicine. Except Suboxone is by mouth, and you can get it by prescription. Another approach to the detox is methadone. In an ideal world, what you would do is someone comes in on I mean, they can shoot up in the parking lot on their way in if they want. They come in and you wait until they are just at the right level of miserable. And you give them just enough methadone to kind of maintain them in that zone of feel like shit, but not dying. And over 24 hours, the heroin will leave their body and be replaced by the methadone. So if you're able to be assessing them frequently and keep it exactly paired off, then you'd know exactly how much methadone equals the amount of heroin that they were using before. Now you got your first step, and then you go step, 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 step to taper off of it. The problems with this is that detoxes don't tend to have RNs. They tend to have LPNs who are just following the script. And so what they will have is a range of, small, medium, and large methadone, basically. So you can be on the methadone and then step, step, step. The other problem is methadone has a very long half-life. So if you have your last dose the day before you are discharged, the final little wisps of methadone leave your system 2 or 3 days later after you've gotten home. And then you get one last little whump of feeling miserable, and you're very, very at risk of relapsing. If you've been on this ride a few times and you know that, I've had many clients who would come in and say, okay, I want to do the methadone detox, but I want to be here when the methadone finally ends. So I want to selectively decline doses to have a steeper taper down. So my taper will hit 0 2 days before insurance says I have to leave. Insurance says if you're not taking all your doses, then you're non-compliant with treatment and you have to go now. So even though they're doing something specifically to improve their chances of success, insurance kicks them out. But what do you expect? Insurance is also prone to say the 3 times the charm thing, where many insurances will have, you can detox 3 times in your lifetime, and then after that, they won't even cover a detox anymore. So make it work in 3 times, or else no more recovery for you. So insurance is not a happy. A third way to detox is on clonidine. Clonidine is an antihypertensive that also has analgesic properties because it slows the metabolism of your endogenous opiates, which means it also slows the metabolism of any old opiates. And so you can take that natural cold turkey misery and smooth it out and make it be a little bit more gradual and more tolerable. So there's some people who, knowing that the methadone kick at the end was really painful, decide to opt for clonidine instead. So those are the different ways to detox. Let's see, someone was talking section 35. Section 35 is the legal ability for a family member or the court to have someone involuntarily committed for substance abuse treatment. So you get a family member who will go into court and swear that if my son or my husband or my kid or whatever does not get locked up and treated, they might die. And it is frequently true that if they don't, they might die. And so it can be life-saving, that they are unable to decide to go in. And for a while, I was very upset with people who would have court-ordered detox, and I still kind of am because there's not enough beds there. And so it's very frustrating when a bed is occupied by someone who is totally not invested, totally not even willing to try. But like it said earlier, sometimes you just have to be present, not even willing, and you might get some benefit out of it. But I still think if there's limited beds, it's not cool to have someone there against their will. Section 35s, they don't go to detoxes. Section 35s, at least in Massachusetts, usually are sent to jail. This is not a therapeutic environment. They are not necessarily likely to get better. They are restricted in their access to the substance, and thus they might detox, and they might be able to then proceed with some form of recovery afterwards. But they're just as likely not to. They might also die in jail because there's no medical staff there, and they might get abused in jail because jail is not a pretty place. And when they finally leave jail, they might really never be speaking to their family anymore and might have no support system at all. So yeah, it can be both life-saving and evil is the answer to that. Let's see. What other ones did people want? Someone was asking about sharing recordings and slides later. On the materials request sheet, you can request the slides, and there's a place where you can just type in what you want. And if you say the recording, I'll send you the link to the recording. You might specify whether you want this one where I'm just kind of rambling a lot, or whether you want the slightly tighter original version. Let's see, someone says 2, 7, 8, and 9. I did 2, 7, 8, and 9. Okay, 7 and 9. Does anyone else know the history of AA? It's very cool. I saw a movie about it. It was nice. There was this guy, Bill, who was an alcoholic and a traveling salesman, made it possible to drink in many different towns around the country. And he was trying to get sober. The thing was, people did not understand what addiction was. They thought that it was just while you were currently using. And so you would have someone who their life is a train wreck because of all the booze. And then there's a reason why when they banned all alcohol, prohibition came right around the time the women's vote came. The people who were going for suffrage were also trying to get booze out of society because there was a lot of correlation between drunk people and domestic violence. Still is. Anyway, so you would have someone who had their life is totally a train wreck from alcoholism, and then they would stop drinking because we didn't have detoxes back then, and they would go through DTs and seizures and all kinds of horrible things, and they'd be terribly sick, and then they would no longer be drinking, and everyone would think, okay, they're all done. And they'd be like, but I still kind of want to drink. And this made no sense to anyone who wasn't an alcoholic, because you now, do you not remember that your life was awful? Oh yes, I know, my life was terrible. My life was awful when I was drinking. I still kind of want to drink. But you got so sick getting off of it. Oh yes, it was awful. It was terrible. I nearly died. It was so much hard work to get off of the booze. And I still kind of want to drink. And people just couldn't understand that. But that's the way it was. And so there's this one guy who was struggling with alcohol and trying to stop drinking. And at one point, a friend of the family said he should go and he should talk to this minister. And so he goes to chat with this minister guy. And the two of them were talking for the longest time before they realized they'd both been told the same thing, that the other person would help them. They both thought that they were going to someone for help. And so it was neat that way. And so they're like, we should meet more often, and we should let other people who want to meet come and meet, which to the non-alcoholic society sounded totally wrong. I mean, why on earth would you put two alcoholics who have stopped drinking, but they keep saying they want to drink, in a room together to talk? They're just going to go out and get drunk. They're just going to talk each other into it. That makes no sense. Except it totally did make sense, because if you turn to someone and say, life was awful, and I still kind of want to drink, having someone who says, yeah, I get you. I feel you. Me too. Let's sit here and keep talking and give each other reasons to keep saying no to drinking. And thus AA was born. It sounded to everyone like the exact worst thing to do. Given the stigma around alcoholism, as AA started to spread, the anonymous part was vitally important. People would not come if they thought anyone would know that they were there. And they had to figure out, how can you possibly, if you go someplace new, how do you know who you could meet if it's basically a secret society? And so the code word was, are you a friend of Bill? Because the first guy was Bill W. Someone I'm sure knows his last name. Possibly many people know his last name, but the whole point of it was that you'd only do first names. And so if you were new in town and you were trying to see if there was a group where you could go and talk to other alcoholics about not drinking, you'd just be like, hey, yeah, I'm new in town. I thought my friend Bill might have been here, but I guess not. Are you a friend of Bill's? And most people be like, huh, Bill who? Oh, no, never mind. But you get every so often someone would be like, oh, yeah, I'm a friend of Bill's. You know, a bunch of Bill's friends, we go to that church every Wednesday night and just hang out. You want to join us? And that's how a person would find AA. Nowadays, you just go online. If you go aaboston.org, they've got the list of all the meetings. And it's cool because you can say, I want one that is all male or all female or, you know, different styles and so on. So you can help screen it that way. Open versus closed. A closed meeting is just that group, bond and stay together and so on. So that's the history of AA. Substance abuse, self-injury, and eating disorders are all potentially symptoms of the same sort of self-sabotaging syndrome of trying to, they're all very dopamine driven. And I really shouldn't have put that there without watching that video again to remember it more clearly. But it was a TED Talk. If someone's interested in that, stick it in the tell me the extra thing on the materials request, and I will find the link to that TED Talk and send it to you. I should put it in this list of links as well. It was someone who has a history of eating disorders talking about how she pretty much, until she got the right kind of therapy, went from eating disorders to self-injury to substance abuse and between those, and they were all just expressions of the same underlying issues. So we're almost to 5 o'clock. I do want to do number 1, even though no one asked for it. And number 5. Okay, 5's really fast. Talked about how there's a stigma in psych. It's fascinating how when you got oppressed groups, they will turn on each other instead of uniting and fighting the oppression. It's very bizarre. Yeah, Dove, that's your own fault for being so far away. Someone was pointing out that's nearly 10 o'clock for him. But the stigma presentation I've got a slide that's from a substance abuse thing saying substance abuse is not a character flaw or a mental illness, it's a disease. It's like, it is a mental illness. It's in the DSM. It's one of the disease. I mean, it's even, we know which neurotransmitters are out of whack causing it. But the fact that it's very important for some people to say it's not a mental illness. You would want, if you've got someone who's got any mental illness, depression, anxiety, anything like that, you would want to look for dual diagnosis for their treatment, if at all possible. Because people will get this idea of, well, they're only drinking because they're depressed. If you just fix the depression, they'll stop drinking. Or they're only depressed because they drink too much. If you just get them to stop drinking, they won't be depressed anymore. There's this whole chicken and the egg thing going. You got both. Does not matter if one triggered the other. You need to treat both actively. You can't fix just one without the other one dragging it back down again. And so you need to be working on both, whatever the mental illness that they might be self-medicating for and the substance abuse that might be exacerbating the mental illness. And it's a real problem if you end up in an AA meeting where everybody's like, well, at least we're not crazy, like those crazy people who have a mental illness. Yeah, you really don't need to be sitting and soaking in that, especially not if you go to a place where, forget whether a person on methadone is sober, they will say, if you take any mind-altering substance whatsoever, you are not sober. So yeah, you're not drinking, but you got to stop the Prozac too, or you don't count as sober. Yeah, you do not need that because that's going to not work. And so the anti-psych thing that can happen in some circles of substance abuse treatment is both bizarre to me and also really, really problematic. The other infighting one that's kind of interesting, it's not really infighting, but AA and NA, if you go to an AA meeting versus an NA meeting, they're very different in tone. And part of that is if you think about the substance in question. For alcohol, if you're an alcoholic, there is a substance out there that is just a beverage for the rest of the world. It is a perfectly common, normal part of normal society. No one else has a problem with this. Maybe I don't either. So you spend your bulk of your time insisting that you don't have a problem, that there's no problem here, and minimizing. If someone says, how much do you drink? We're always taught, ask them how much do they drink. Do not ask if they drink. And then whatever they say, assume that that's the lowest possible number, and they probably drink twice as much, because that's how alcoholism works, is you keep telling yourself, no, there's nothing to see here. There's no problem. I don't drink that much. Minimize, minimize, minimize. And there tends to be a fair amount of shame associated with that. Everyone else can handle this. And why can't I? I wish I could. I'm ashamed, which is why if you're in a detox and the alcoholic doesn't come out, you go in and take their blood pressure or their pulse in there. It might be that they're feeling too symptomatic. It might be that they overslept, or it might be that they're just feeling ashamed and don't want to show their faces in public. So they tend to isolate a lot. Opiate addicts, on the other hand, the way you feed your substance when you are addicted to opiates is by maximizing. You go to the doctor and say, yeah, doc, I know you gave me a whole month's worth, but I am in so much pain. You need to give me more. Or you go to the drug dealer in the corner and I'm like, oh, come on, I'm really hurting here. You got to give me something. So it's always saying, I need more, I need more, I need more. What I'm using is not enough. I need more, I need more. Compared to the alcoholic who's going, no, I don't take that much. Less. Plus, the process of getting the opiates frequently involves illegal activity, possible weapon use, running away from police, lots and lots of adrenaline-soaked traumatic experiences. And that can give them sort of getting a little hooked on the adrenaline as well. So I've been to AA meetings where someone who couldn't find an NA meeting comes to the AA meeting. And when they get up to share, when an alcoholic gets up to share, they're talking about how much their life sucked and how hard it is to acknowledge how much they were really drinking and how much their life sucks. NA meetings, you got people doing their war stories. I was using this, and I was using this, I was using this. And sometimes it takes them a while to remember, oh yes, and it was bad, because they're like lighting up with all the adrenaline of how exciting it all was, and until they get past that, it's really kind of exciting. It's very hard for them to stay sober. I'd be working in the detox and you get people who have had massive infections from injections. And there was one guy where he had such a portion of his arm gone from an abscess where they'd had to take muscle tissue away as well. And I'm like, shark attack? What happened there? And he just lights up talking about how close he came to dying. And I was this close to saying, why don't you come back when you're a little bit more interested in getting better rather than how exciting it is that you were that sick. So is there a risk with non-alcoholic beer during recovery, or is it useful? Ooh, that is a good question. I would say it depends very much on the person. Almost certainly it is bad because of the way anything that reminds you of your substance is liable to trigger an anticipatory dopamine rush of here it comes. And then when the alcohol doesn't show up, you crash and you crave. So frequently, the most common thing is that you need to get away from reminders. So having something that's just like beer, but without it, usually a bad idea. For some people, it might be a good idea, but that's really the exception. And I had a student at one point who was suggesting, there was one, I was talking to a client who had substance use that was very much tied to that person hurt my feelings and therefore I had no choice but to drink. So really needed to get to the whole, you need to face those feelings and not have it be, I'm just going to drink and blame them sort of thing. But the student was, hey, here's an idea. How about you just do some self-soothing thing and kind of sit with your feelings and maybe go make yourself like a nice mocktail? And I'm like, no, no, bad idea. Do not go and do the, hey, I'll just pretend I'm drinking and see how that goes, is not helpful. For some people, I mean, like anything, if it works, it works. But it isn't something I would suggest because it's more likely to be counterproductive. Yeah. Are there any nurses still out there? My favorite mean question to ask nurses is, if you've got someone who comes into the detox and they say that they have been abusing alcohol and cocaine, which, by the way, is the most dangerous combination you could do. Very common, very dangerous. But cocaine keeps you awake until you can drink enough alcohol to die of alcohol poisoning. Anyway, they say they've been abusing alcohol and cocaine, and they're there, and you're checking their vitals, and their vitals are not elevated at all for the first 24 hours. What does this tell you? You know, what do you expect? Do you expect them to be, having a very, seizures or what? And the students would all be totally confused. I'd have a more precise thing of what you're looking for. And the tricky bit is what it tells you is that they never drink alcohol, they use lots of cocaine, and they have been in detox before. And thus they've learned that you cannot get a bed for detox or for cocaine, because cocaine does not technically have a detox. You might really feel like using it again, definite withdrawal that can go on your entire life. But there's no detox for it. And if you just really want that bed because it's cold outside, and you go in and you say, I've only been using cocaine, you're not going to get the bed. But if you say you've been using cocaine and alcohol, then you get the bed. But then your vital signs show that you're not detoxing from alcohol. So that's what that tells you. Cocaine, the insidious thing about cocaine is it makes you feel like a god. It makes you feel amazing, like you could do anything. You are omnipotent, and everything is, you are just the best thing ever. And the problem is, we all get, you might feel like you go to the gym and you're like, this feels great, I've got to remember and go to the gym again. And by the time you get home, you've totally forgotten it. The cocaine that makes you feel like a god, which if your normal life sucks, is even more of a contrast. The centers it latches onto are your learning centers of your brain. So you feel like a god while you're high, and you never forget how good that felt. So cocaine is one of the ones that you can be addicted on the very first use. You can use it once, and you will never be able to stop wanting to use it again, because you never forget how good that felt. And in all likelihood, it never feels that good again. And so people are constantly trying to get that first experience again. And that's where they use more and more. Stimulants with beta blockers. Don't know much about that. Tell me more. I should go look that up. Do you mean like someone who's just on beta blockers, or they're mixing them on purpose for nefarious purposes? If you're still by your keyboard, tell me more of what you're asking. Or not. One of the main ways people, lowering the heart rate when on stimulants. It might keep you alive. I mean, it'd be better to just not be using the stimulants. I've got people prescribed stimulants and beta blockers because they've got ADHD and anxiety, which is a real pain, because what you take for the ADHD increases the anxiety, and what you take for the anxiety might, but if you don't treat the anxiety, it's ADHD. The other problem with cocaine is that you can have a heart attack and die on your first use too. Cocaine can like plop you down at like mile 12 of a marathon. And if you could not run 12 miles without having a heart attack, it doesn't go well for you. But yeah, I could see someone doing that. Someone who planned ahead to try and die less, I guess. What we frequently see for abusing stimulants, if they're trying to like get high on it, one thing people will do is change the route. So if you've got a pill that you normally swallow, normally you swallow it and it goes to your intestine and the liver takes its share. The first pass takes some amount of the drug out, metabolizes some of it away, and then the rest goes into your bloodstream. So what we put in that pill is taking into account that not all of it will make it to your bloodstream and that it's going to get there kind of gradually as it trickles through the intestines. If you grind it up and mix it in a liquid and inject it, or you grind it up and you snort it, the full amount in the pill goes into your bloodstream extremely fast. When you make something with a fast onset, you feel it more. And so that's what the high feels like, is the abrupt change. And so that's how people will abuse things a lot. The other use and abuse we see around stimulants is just diversion. I mean, technically, abuse includes taking any prescription med in any manner other than what it was prescribed, which includes if your name ain't on the bottle, that's diversion, and that's abuse. If the bottle says you can take it twice a day and you're taking it 3 times a day, then that is abuse. Unless you've had, instructions from the doctor that, yes, now you can take it 3 times a day. One of the things that I won't even take clients on benzos anymore because they will overtake them. You've got your 30-day supply and they're calling me up after 20 days saying, yeah, I'm going to run out tomorrow because I had to take extras. And no matter how much I tell them, the moment you are taking 1 extra, you need to be talking to me. They don't. And now they're running out and I'm over a barrel because if I say no, they're going to detox and possibly have seizures and could die. So the only way I can get it filled early is if I actually go ahead and write a higher dose to explain why they're getting it early. So they have now unilaterally increased their dose without me having any say in it. And that's not okay. So one approach I might take, and if you're ever looking on the MassPat, if you've got access to go and see the controlled substances reporting of who's filled what, one thing you might see is someone who's getting if they get a 3-day supply once, that might be an insurance thing or a supply thing, or the doctor just wanted them to go on a plane or something like that. But if you get someone where it's written for them to fill it once a week instead of once a month or once every 3 days, that is, you put someone on a really short leash so that they just don't have so much that they can overtake them and get themselves into trouble like that. And I've had clients where it was when I had to handwrite the damn things too, that I'd write multiple prescriptions. This one's for Tuesday, this one's for Friday, this one's for Monday, for them to fill just 3-day supplies of things to keep them from doing that. But yeah, benzos are annoying. I've gotten people off of them by using beta blockers though. So, okay. Anyone have any other questions? Anything else out there? Ooh, sorry. How important, I didn't see that there was another one. How important is exercise in recovery? Everything health-wise is important in recovery. Getting as good sleep as you can, lots and lots of water, drink water, healthy diet, getting vitamins. In fact, alcoholics, we give them thiamine injection the moment they arrive because they could be getting thiamine deficiency encephalopathy. They could keel over with seizures and die at any time if they've been having alcohol as their primary food for the last period of time. But yeah, we would, good food, exercise, healthy living, things like that are important as well. It always amused me that we would have vitamins for everyone in the detox and they'd come for their morning meds and they decline the vitamins. I'd say, why are you declining this vitamin? They'd say, because it's not natural. Like, really? And where have you been getting that organic opium? Because you've been shooting up God knows what for 6 months and now you're going to decline a vitamin because it's not pure enough for you. That's entertaining. Let's see. Someone might be trying to create a vaccine that would stop cocaine and other drugs from crossing the blood-brain barrier. Thoughts? Well, first of all, it's not a vaccine. but you probably were just using an easy word. Vaccine would be to stimulate immune response against a germ. They're trying to create some treatment that would stop cocaine from crossing the blood-brain barrier. I cannot imagine what that would be. I cannot imagine, other than finding something that could selectively latch onto the drug, thus making that molecule unable to cross the blood-brain barrier. That could work. You would not be able to do anything that actually affects the blood-brain barrier. No, vaccine? Then my thoughts are, okay, he's, for those who are listening, the writer just doubled down that no, vaccine is the word that they want. No, vaccine is for immune system response. So that makes it even more sound like a snake oil thing. You couldn't do anything to the blood-brain barrier itself to make it impermeable without risking it being impermeable to things that you need to be able to cross the blood-brain barrier for the brain to stay alive. So you could potentially try to get something that would always be in your system and would latch onto the drug, onto specific molecules of drug to change them into something that can't get through the blood-brain barrier. But so many of these are mimics of the actual chemicals that your body produces for the use of your brain that you can't really mess with them that easily. You want to recognize that every chemical that we take in, the reason why it has any effect is because it is similar enough to one. Let's see. Just to read this, for those who can't be reading this, the experimental vaccine consists of a cocaine analog linked to an inactive adenovirus that, when administered, stimulates the immune system to produce large molecule antibodies. But then what would the large molecule antibodies do? Would they then be able to latch onto the cocaine? I guess that was, yeah, that would be what, okay, so instead of having a chemical that you're taking that is latching onto the cocaine and keeping it from crossing, it's that is trying to stimulate the immune system to produce something that would latch onto the cocaine and make it too big to cross the barrier. It's interesting, but so they're starting with the cocaine analog, and it's attached to a virus so that the immune system will produce large molecule antibodies. I don't see how you would persuade the antibodies to view the cocaine as what they're responding to. I mean, you start by getting it to respond to the fact that there's adenovirus in there. Yeah, like I said, thus the antibodies would latch onto the cocaine. Thing is, the antibodies are taught to identify this is what you're supposed to latch onto by taking cocaine and attaching it to a virus, because antibodies respond to viruses. And then somehow it would still recognize the cocaine half as what it wants to latch onto, not just the virus half. That's the first thing that I'm not entirely sure would work. Because for one thing, antibodies go after proteins, and cocaine does not have a protein in it. I will look that up. That's interesting, but I don't really see how it would work. Though there is the fact that technically allergy is responding to proteins, and we do have drug allergies, which are clearly not responding to a protein. So So yeah, it would be trying to create basically a drug allergy to cocaine. And part of it would be the allergic response to the cocaine would be antibodies that would make the cocaine too big. It would need to be very much each drug specific. So while you might be able to get something that would be, okay, cocaine specific, it's going to be really hard. You know, you'd have to, if the cocaine addict then goes and starts using something else, then you'd have to come up with a whole nother one to address the other, whatever other drugs they're using. It also would not prevent the part of it is the problem with addiction is the craving. And so you do want to also make sure that you are addressing the craving. I think if you've got someone who is totally on board with the recovery, it's interesting that they're doing, that cocaine is the one that they are focusing on. Well, they couldn't do opiates because opiates have to be able to cross the blood-brain barrier because you need them for your own body. Okay. Can you stick those, the citation in the chat? Because the chat, I don't know that I'll have the Q&A afterwards. And I do want to look up that citation. And I'm too lazy to write it down myself. It's been a long day. Thank you very much. That's interesting. Yeah, check that out. Oh, that's weird. It made you anonymous in the Q&A, and then it told me who you are in the chat. Cool. That is interesting. Getting antibodies to do that. So. Fascinating things we can make our own immune system do. And as I'm fascinated with what the mRNA vaccines, what else they will be applicable to. Whether, not just that it was great that we got a COVID vaccine faster than ever before, but whether that means we're going to be able to get everything vaccines as fast, because now all you need to do is map out the DNA, and then you can just plug it in and it'll make it. And it's like you can do a 3D printer for your immune system practically. So anyway, well, now I need to go look that up. I'm not doing it tonight because I'm really tired, and I got stung by a bee today and it was scary. I don't want to be phobic of bees, but it appears to have happened. I earned it well though. I got the crap stung out of me a couple years ago. So anyway, so if there's no other questions or very, very confusing things I need to go research now, I don't have anyone else having at this point requested any more presentations, but if anyone does, keep looking at the calendar, because I will keep updating the calendar. If any of you wish that there was one, go ahead and plug it in on the calendar. Dove, if you've got other people that would like to do one, heck, schedule one. That would be cool. You could even schedule it earlier in the day so you don't have to stay up so late. And it's been fun. So take care, everybody, and have a good weekend. Bye-bye.